The morning sun peeked through the gaps of the thatched roof, spilling soft golden light onto a small, humble hut in the heart of a quiet village. Inside, an old man named Hari sat cross-legged on the floor, his wrinkled face calm and serene as he ate his breakfast, just a bowl of plain rice and a few slices of mango. Outside, children laughed as they ran barefoot on the dusty road, their joy echoing through the morning air. Hari smiled. To him, that laughter was wealth. Not far from his hut stood a large mansion with shining windows and tall iron gates. It belonged to Ramesh, a wealthy businessman known for his success and his endless desire for more. Ramesh often looked out from his balcony and saw Hari sitting peacefully beneath the same tree every day, feeding stray birds with a smile on his face. It puzzled him. One afternoon, Ramesh's car broke down near the old man's hut. Annoyed, he stepped out and saw Hari offering a piece of his fruit to a hungry child. The child's eyes lit up as if he had just received the world. "Why are you so happy?" Ramesh blurted out. "You have nothing. Look at your house, your clothes. You have no car, no luxury, no wealth. What could you possibly be smiling about?" Hari looked at him and chuckled softly. "I have everything I need," he said. "The sun to warm me, food to fill my belly, and peace in my heart." Ramesh frowned. "Peace doesn't buy comfort. You live in poverty." The old man's eyes softened. "You call it poverty because you think happiness is something you can own. But happiness isn't bought, Ramesh, it's shared." That night, Ramesh couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, surrounded by his expensive pillows and silk sheets. The sound of laughter from a street outside, the same laughter he often ignored, now echoed in his mind. He rose from bed and stood by his window, watching Hari once again sitting under the moonlight, sharing a small meal with a group of children. Something inside Ramesh shifted. The next morning, he walked to the hut carrying a basket of fruits. Hari greeted him warmly, his smile unchanged. "I brought these for you," Ramesh said awkwardly. "You shouldn't have to eat the same thing every day." Hari nodded with gratitude, but then handed half the fruits back. "Let's share them," he said. "They'll taste better that way." Ramesh hesitated, then sat down beside the old man. They ate together in silence, watching the sunrise. For the first time in years, Ramesh felt the weight of his thoughts fade. Days turned into weeks, and soon Ramesh found himself visiting the hut often. He helped repair the roof, played with the children, and even planted a small garden nearby. The villagers began to notice the change in him. The once arrogant man now laughed easily, spoke gently, and smiled more often. One evening, as they watched the sun dip into the horizon, Ramesh asked, "Hari, when did you learn to be so content with so little?" The old man gazed at the fading sky. "When I stopped comparing what I had to what others had," he said quietly. "When I realized that joy is not in having more, but in needing less." Ramesh sat in silence, the truth sinking deep into his heart. He looked at the old man, then at the children playing nearby, their laughter pure, their faces bright with simple joy. He realized that he had spent his life chasing things that never filled him, bigger houses, faster cars, more money. But here, sitting on the ground beside a man who had so little, he felt richer than ever. That night, he returned home and walked through the silent halls of his mansion. Every corner, every object, seemed hollow, lifeless compared to the warmth he had felt under that humble tree. He walked to his study, where he had once proudly displayed his trophies, certificates, and awards. But tonight, they felt meaningless. He took one photo, a picture of his younger self standing beside his first small shop, and smiled. "That was when I was happiest," he whispered. The next morning, the village awoke to something unexpected. The big iron gates of Ramesh's mansion were opened for the first time. Children ran in freely, their laughter filling the grand halls. Villagers were invited for a meal. Everyone, rich or poor, sat together. Hari sat beside Ramesh, smiling quietly as the man who once lived only for himself now served others with joy. "You were right," Ramesh said softly. "Happiness grows when it's shared." Hari nodded, his eyes twinkling. "And it begins," he replied, "when we stop chasing more and start cherishing what we already have." The sky blushed pink above them as the village echoed with laughter, stories, and songs. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of greed had become a home of gratitude, a place where simplicity breathed life into every heart. And somewhere deep within, Ramesh realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. From that day on, Ramesh's life transformed in ways no one could have imagined. The mansion that had once been cold and silent now echoed with voices, laughter, and music. Children played in the courtyard, their tiny feet leaving prints of joy on the marble floors. Villagers came and went freely, not out of curiosity or greed, but out of love. And every morning, without fail, Hari would arrive carrying a basket of fruits, his slow, steady walk radiating peace. Ramesh began to spend his days differently. He no longer rushed to his office or worried about business deals. Instead, he walked through the fields with the farmers, learning about the soil, the crops, and the patience it took to nurture something from nothing. He found a strange satisfaction in helping them harvest, his once soft hands now roughened by honest work. One afternoon, a little girl named Mira came running up to him, holding a flower crown she had made. "For you, uncle," she said with a grin that showed her missing front teeth. Ramesh knelt down, laughing as she placed the delicate crown on his head. "Do I look like a king now?" he asked. Mira giggled. "You look happier than a king." That simple sentence struck something deep in him. Happier than a king. What a strange and beautiful thing to be. That night, as the moonlight streamed through his window, Ramesh thought of his old friends, the wealthy businessmen who still chased profit and status. They met every weekend at luxury clubs, boasting about their success, their cars, their travels. He used to be one of them. But now, as he sat under the same roof that had once suffocated him, surrounded by the sound of crickets and the faint laughter of the children outside, he realized he no longer missed that life. In the weeks that followed, Ramesh began to sell parts of his business, quietly, without announcement. The money he earned, he used to rebuild the village school, repair broken wells, and start a small community center where people could come to learn new skills. He didn't do it for recognition or praise. He simply wanted to give back what life had given him, a second chance to understand what happiness truly meant. One evening, as the orange glow of sunset painted the horizon, Hari joined him by the riverbank. The two men sat side by side, their reflections shimmering in the water. "You have changed, Ramesh," Hari said gently. "Your eyes used to be full of worry. Now they are full of peace." Ramesh smiled faintly. "You were my mirror, Hari. I saw in you the man I wanted to become, free, content, alive." Hari chuckled softly. "Peace comes to those who stop fighting life, my friend. The moment you stop comparing, you started living." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of flowing water filling the space between them. Then Ramesh turned to him. "Do you ever regret not having more? Not seeing the world, not chasing dreams beyond this village?" Hari looked at the sky, now painted in soft hues of purple. "The world is right here, Ramesh," he said. "Every sunrise, every laugh, every shared meal. That is my world. I don't need to travel far to find beauty. It's in the small things most people overlook." The words lingered in Ramesh's mind long after the night fell. He realized that the reason he had never found peace before was because he had been looking too far, always searching outside for something that could only grow within. One day, a letter arrived from the city. It was from one of his old business partners, inviting him to a grand conference where his success story would be honored. There would be cameras, speeches, and praise, the kind of attention that used to feed his ego. Ramesh stared at the letter for a long time, then smiled and folded it neatly. The next morning, instead of traveling to the city, he went to the village school. The children had painted the walls with bright colors, blues, yellows, and greens. He picked up a brush and began painting with them, laughter echoing around the room. He didn't need applause anymore. The joy on their faces was worth more than any trophy. Weeks passed, and Ramesh noticed that Hari was growing weaker. The old man's steps had slowed, his breath shallow. Still, he never stopped smiling. Every morning, he would feed the birds, his trembling hands steady when offering them grains. Ramesh began spending more time with him, sitting by his side, listening to his quiet wisdom. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Hari looked at Ramesh and said softly, "Promise me something." "Anything," Ramesh replied. "When I am gone," Hari said with a faint smile, "don't grieve. Keep sharing what you have, your time, your kindness, your heart. That is how life stays beautiful." Ramesh nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I promise." A few days later, Hari passed away peacefully, sitting beneath the same tree where he had once shared his fruits. The entire village gathered to honor him, not with grand ceremonies, but with silent smiles and stories. Ramesh planted a sapling beside the old tree, his eyes filled with tears that shimmered in the sunlight. As the days turned into months, the sapling grew, its branches stretching toward the sky. Beneath it, children played, villagers gathered, and birds came to rest. Ramesh often sat there alone, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. He thought of Hari's words often. Joy is not in having more, but in needing less. And every time he shared a meal, every time he helped someone, every time he smiled at a stranger, he felt that same quiet happiness take root inside him again, the kind that no wealth could ever buy, the kind that never fades. Years passed, but the memory of Hari remained alive in every corner of the village. The tree he planted had grown tall and strong, its branches spreading wide, as if embracing everyone who came near. Beneath it, a small wooden bench stood, built by Ramesh himself, where people would sit to rest, talk, and share stories. Children often gathered there after school, listening as the elders spoke of the man who taught them the meaning of true happiness. Ramesh had grown older too, his hair now silver, his face marked with gentle lines that told stories of both struggle and peace. But his eyes, those same eyes that once reflected greed and pride, now held only warmth. Every morning, he began his day at the tree, offering food to the birds, just as Hari once did. It had become more than a ritual. It was his way of staying connected to the spirit of the man who changed his life. One crisp morning, as the fog rolled over the fields, Ramesh heard footsteps behind him. It was Mira, the little girl who had once crowned him, happier than a king. She was grown now, tall, graceful, with eyes full of life and kindness. She smiled as she approached. "Uncle Ramesh," she said softly, "the new school building is ready. The children are waiting for you to cut the ribbon." Ramesh turned to her with a proud smile. "Then let us not keep them waiting." They walked through the village together, passing homes he had helped rebuild, gardens that had flourished with shared effort, and faces that greeted him with love. When they reached the new school, the children stood in neat rows, clapping their hands and cheering. The walls were painted with bright colors, each one telling a story of unity, kindness, and simplicity. As Ramesh cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted in joy. He looked around at the faces, young and old, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The school wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything Hari had believed in. It represented a life built not on wealth, but on giving. Later that day, as the children filled the classrooms, Ramesh sat quietly in the back of one room. The teacher, a young man from the city, noticed him and approached. "Sir, I've heard so much about you," he said, "about how you turned this place into a home for everyone. What made you change?" Ramesh smiled faintly. "An old man with kind eyes once told me that happiness doesn't come from getting what we want. It comes from loving what we already have. I didn't understand it then, but now I see. The more we give, the lighter our hearts become." The teacher nodded, moved by his words. "And what if people don't appreciate what you give?" Ramesh chuckled. "Then you give anyway. Because giving is not about being thanked, it's about being true to yourself." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ramesh walked alone to the riverbank, the same place where he and Hari had once sat together. The air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine. He could almost hear Hari's voice again, calm and full of quiet wisdom. He sat down and closed his eyes, letting the memories wash over him. The first time he had met the old man, the first time he had felt genuine peace, the first time he had shared a meal with no expectations. Every moment came back like a gentle wave, soothing his soul. Suddenly, he heard laughter, the laughter of children playing nearby. He opened his eyes and saw them splashing water at each other, carefree and happy. One of them noticed him and waved. "Come join us, uncle." Ramesh smiled. "Not today," he said softly, "but keep laughing, my little ones. That's the sound that keeps this world alive." As the children ran off, Ramesh's gaze returned to the setting sun. He thought of how different his life had once been, how he had measured his worth in things that could be counted, bought, or sold. Now he measured it in moments, moments of connection, compassion, and peace. He rose slowly, his steps steady, and began walking back toward the village. The lamps were being lit one by one, their golden glow flickering in the twilight. People greeted him warmly as he passed, a sign of respect that came not from fear or obligation, but from love. At home, he sat by his window with a cup of tea. Outside, he could hear the soft murmur of life, the chatter of families, the bark of dogs, the rustle of trees in the wind. Everything felt alive, perfectly balanced. A gentle knock came at his door. It was Mira again, carrying a small box. "Uncle," she said shyly, The children wanted to give you this. Ramesh opened it carefully. Inside was a small clay bird, painted in bright colors. Beneath it was a note written in a child's uneven handwriting. Thank you for teaching us that happiness is something we can share. He felt his throat tighten. Tell them, he said softly, that they've taught me more than I could ever teach them. That night, as he lay in bed, the wind whispered through the open window, carrying the scent of the old tree outside. He felt at peace, not because he had achieved everything, but because he had finally learned to let go of wanting more. Years had shown him that joy wasn't found in possessions or praise, but in presence, in being fully alive to the beauty of ordinary days. As sleep gently embraced him, he dreamed of Hari standing beneath the great tree, smiling as the sunlight danced through the leaves. The old man's voice echoed in his mind, calm and steady. The richest heart is the one that knows when it has enough. Ramesh smiled in his sleep. His journey had come full circle, from wanting everything to needing nothing, from chasing happiness to becoming it. And though the world outside continued to move, within him there was only stillness, the kind that only a truly content soul could ever know. The next morning, Ramesh woke before dawn. A soft golden glow was spreading across the horizon, and the air was cool with the scent of wet earth. He stepped outside, barefoot, feeling the morning dew soak into his skin. The village was still quiet, the only sound being the faint chirping of birds from the great tree near his home. He looked at it tall, proud, live, and smiled. It felt like the spirit of Hari still lingered there, watching over everyone, reminding them of the beauty of simple living. He walked toward the tree, carrying a small basket of grains. As he scattered them on the ground, birds began to descend one by one, their wings brushing the air like whispers. He stood there in silence, watching them eat. There was something sacred about this routine, something that made him feel grounded, human, real. Soon, the village began to wake. Smoke rose from chimneys, mothers called their children, and the sounds of life slowly filled the air. Meera came by, as she did every morning, bringing him tea. "Uncle," she said with a bright smile, "the children want to start a garden beside the school. They said you would know how to make it beautiful." Ramesh chuckled softly. "Then we'll make it together," he replied. "But remember, the beauty of a garden doesn't come from how many flowers it has. It comes from how much love you give while growing it." She nodded thoughtfully, her eyes shining with admiration. That's what Hari would say too. Ramesh smiled at the mention of his old friend's name. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's exactly what he'd say." Later that day, they began their work. The children dug small holes in the earth, while Ramesh guided them patiently, showing them how to plant seeds and water them with care. Laughter filled the air as they splashed each other with water from the buckets. To anyone passing by, it looked like a scene from a dream, simple, pure, full of life. As the sun climbed higher, Ramesh sat under the tree to rest. Meera joined him, handing him a cup of cool water. "You know, Uncle," she said, "everyone in the village says you've changed this place. You've made us all happier." He took a sip of water, thinking for a moment before answering. "No, Meera, I didn't change this place. You all did. I only reminded you of what you already had, each other." She smiled, understanding his words, even if they sounded simple. For her, Ramesh was more than just a man. He was a bridge between generations, someone who carried wisdom like sunlight, spreading it quietly wherever he went. In the following weeks, the garden bloomed. Bright marigolds, lilies, and jasmine filled the air with their fragrance. Children played among the plants, learning the patience that came with caring for something that grew slowly. Ramesh often stood at the edge of the garden, his eyes soft with pride. One evening, as the sky turned crimson, a stranger arrived in the village. He was dressed in fine clothes and drove a shiny car that caught everyone's attention. When he asked for Ramesh, the villagers guided him to the old man's home. Ramesh greeted him kindly. "Welcome, traveler. What brings you here?" The man introduced himself as Arjun, the son of one of Ramesh's former business associates. "Sir," he began respectfully, "my father used to tell me stories about you, how you were one of the most successful men in the city before you disappeared. I came here to see if the stories about your new life were true." Ramesh smiled faintly. "And what do you think?" Arjun looked around at the children playing, the laughter echoing from a school, the scent of blooming flowers carried by the wind. "It's peaceful," he said softly. "But don't you miss it? The power, the wealth, the recognition." Ramesh looked at him, his gaze calm and deep. "No," he said, "because none of those things could ever give me what this peace gives." Wealth fills your house, Arjun, but peace fills your heart. Arjun fell silent, his mind struggling to grasp the simplicity of those words. He had grown up believing that happiness came from ambition, from climbing higher, owning more. Yet here was a man who had walked away from all of it, and somehow seemed richer than anyone he had ever met. As night fell, Ramesh invited Arjun to stay for dinner. They sat under the great tree with the villagers, sharing rice, lentils, and laughter. There was no silverware, no grand feast, yet the warmth around that simple meal was something Arjun had never felt before. Afterward, as they sat watching the stars, Arjun said quietly, "You found something rare, sir. Something I think everyone is searching for, but doesn't know how to name." Ramesh nodded slowly. "It's not rare, Arjun. It's just overlooked. We chase so many things that we forget the simplest truth. Happiness was never lost, we just stopped noticing it." The younger man sat in silence, his heart heavy with realization. For the first time, he wondered if he, too, had been chasing the wrong things all his life. The next morning, before leaving, Arjun touched Ramesh's feet in respect. "Thank you," he said. "You've taught me more in one night than the city ever did in years." Ramesh placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember this, my boy, joy multiplies when it's shared. Whatever you do, do it with kindness. That's how you'll stay happy, no matter where you go." When Arjun drove away, Ramesh watched the car disappear down the dusty road. He felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. He didn't need to change the whole world. It was enough to touch one heart at a time. As the sun rose higher, he turned back toward the village. Mira waved at him from the school garden, her face glowing with sunlight. He waved back, his heart full. The world moved slowly around him, but to Ramesh, it was perfect, a living reminder that life's truest treasures are found not in abundance, but in appreciation. Days rolled into weeks, and the rhythm of the village continued like a gentle song that never ended. The laughter of children became the heartbeat of the place, the scent of blooming flowers drifted through the air, and the rustling of leaves whispered stories of peace. Ramesh moved through it all like a quiet observer, his steps slower now, but his heart still strong and open. Every face he passed greeted him with warmth, every voice carried respect born not out of fear, but love. He had become the soul of the village, a living memory of humility and grace. One morning, as he sat beneath the old tree, a boy came running toward him, carrying a small bird with a broken wing. "Uncle Ramesh," the boy said breathlessly, "I found it near the well. It can't fly. Can we help it?" Ramesh looked at the tiny creature trembling in the boy's hands. "Of course we can," he said softly. "But first we must be gentle. Everything that heals needs patience." They built a small nest from soft cloth and placed it in a wooden box. Every day, Ramesh and the boy took turns feeding the bird, talking to it, and waiting for its wing to heal. The villagers watched this small act of kindness with quiet admiration. Even the smallest things, they realized, mattered deeply to Ramesh. He treated life itself as something sacred. As days passed, the bird slowly regained strength. One morning, it fluttered its wings and took off into the air. The boy clapped in delight, and Ramesh smiled, his eyes glistening. "See," he said, "freedom comes when you trust that pain will pass." The boy hugged him tightly before running off to tell his friends. Ramesh watched him go, his heart swelling with warmth. He thought about Hari again, how the old man's words had taken root in his soul, growing like this great tree under which he now sat. Hari had taught him that kindness multiplies like ripples in water. You give a little, and the world becomes brighter in return. That afternoon, clouds began to gather above the village. The sky turned dark, and thunder rolled in the distance. A heavy storm soon followed, drenching everything in its path. The villagers hurried to secure their homes, while Ramesh and a few others helped move the animals to shelter. The wind howled, trees swayed, and the river roared with wild force. It was one of the strongest storms the village had seen in years. When the rain finally stopped the next morning, the village was in disarray. Fallen branches, broken fences, and pools of muddy water covered the ground. The new garden beside the school was almost destroyed, flowers torn, soil washed away. The children stood around it in silence, their faces pale with disappointment. Ramesh walked up to them, his clothes still damp from a night before. He looked at the garden for a long moment, then smiled gently. "Don't be sad," he said. "The flowers may be gone, but the seeds of love you planted are still here." We'll rebuild it together, and it will bloom again, even more beautifully." His calmness seemed to light something inside everyone. The villagers gathered tools, the children fetched water, and soon, laughter and energy filled the air once more. They replanted, rebuilt, and restored the garden from ruin. By evening, the earth smelled fresh and new, as though nature herself had forgiven the storm. Later, as twilight settled, Mira came to Ramesh with a warm blanket. "You worked too much today," she said. "You should rest." He smiled. "When I see everyone working with joy, I rest inside, even if my body tires." She looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "Sometimes I think you're more than human, Uncle. You carry something peaceful that the rest of us can only feel when we're near you." Ramesh chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm human, Mira. I've just learned to stop fighting with life. When you make peace with the world inside you, the world outside begins to follow." As night fell, the villagers gathered for a simple meal under the tree. The sky was clear again, stars twinkling above like lanterns. Someone began to play a flute, and children danced barefoot on the grass. Ramesh sat watching them, his heart overflowing. He realized that these small moments of shared joy were what life was meant to be. He remembered the years he had spent chasing wealth, attending grand parties, signing deals that brought him nothing but more emptiness. He remembered how lonely he had felt surrounded by people who smiled with their lips but not with their hearts. And then he looked at the children laughing, the family sharing food, and he knew he had finally found the meaning of home. As the night deepened, he closed his eyes and listened. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the faint echo of Hari's laughter. For a moment, he could almost see the old man sitting beside him, nodding approvingly. It was as if Hari's spirit lived not only in the tree, but in every act of kindness that now blossomed in the village. The next morning, Ramesh woke early again. The storm had cleared the sky, leaving it bright and endless. He walked down to the riverbank, the same place where he and Hari had once sat years ago. The water shimmered in the morning light, and birds skimmed its surface gracefully. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool breeze against his skin. Every sense felt alive. Every moment felt full. He sat on a rock and watched the flow of water. It moved gently yet powerfully, never stopping, never clinging to anything, just like life. He picked up a small pebble and dropped it into the river. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles, fading gradually but never truly disappearing. He smiled to himself. That was how he saw his life now. Not as something grand or eternal, but as ripples of goodness spreading quietly into the world. Maybe one day, when he was gone, those ripples would still touch someone's heart. Maybe a child who grew up under this tree would teach others the same lesson, that happiness doesn't come from what we take, but from what we give. The sun rose higher, golden light dancing on the water. Ramesh closed his eyes again, listening to the steady rhythm of the river, the heartbeat of the earth, and the gentle echo of all the lives he had touched. And in that silence his soul smiled. A few days later, the village prepared for its annual festival, a celebration of harvest, gratitude, and togetherness. It was the time of year when every household came alive with color, laughter, and music. Stalls lined the streets, filled with handmade crafts, sweets, and flowers. Children ran barefoot, their faces painted with joy. And at the center of it all, beneath the great tree, stood Ramesh, smiling as he watched everyone move about in cheerful chaos. He had become a quiet symbol of hope to them, the man who once lived in luxury but found his true wealth in the simplicity of the village. Everywhere he went, people offered him fruit, invited him to sit, or simply bowed their heads in respect. But Ramesh accepted it all with humility, never seeing himself as anyone greater than the rest. Mira approached him that morning, her hands full of garlands. "Uncle, we're decorating the stage. The children will be performing a play tonight, about you and Hari." Ramesh raised his brows, surprised. "About us?" She laughed, nodding. "Yes. They want to show everyone how happiness isn't about gold or riches, but about giving and sharing. You must sit in the front and watch." He chuckled softly. "Then I'll be honored to see how your young storytellers remember two old fools like us." As the sun set, the entire village gathered around the open square. Lanterns hung from every tree, glowing like tiny stars. The air smelled of roasted corn and jasmine flowers. The children took the stage, their small voices carrying the story of Hari, the humble man who lived simply, and Ramesh, the rich man who discovered that the true measure of life was not in what he owned, but in what he gave. As the play went on, laughter and applause filled the air. But for Ramesh, each line spoken by those children stirred something deep inside him. When the little boy playing Hari said, "Joy is not in having more, but in needing less," Ramesh's eyes filled with tears. It was as though Hari himself was speaking to him again through those innocent voices. When the play ended, the crowd stood and cheered. The children ran to Ramesh, placing a garland around his neck. "Uncle, did you like it?" one of them asked eagerly. Ramesh wiped a tear from his cheek and smiled. "It was perfect," he said softly. "You didn't just tell my story, you reminded me why it mattered." The festival continued late into the night. People danced around the fire, singing songs of the harvest. Ramesh joined them for a while, clapping along, his laughter echoing with theirs. For a man who once thought joy came from achievement, he now found it in the simplest things: a shared song, a shared meal, a shared heart. As midnight approached, the music began to fade, and people slowly returned to their homes. Ramesh stayed behind, sitting beneath the great tree. The air was cool, the stars endless above him. He closed his eyes, feeling the steady hum of life all around, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, the faint echo of drums in the distance. He thought of how far he had come. Once he had lived for himself, surrounded by walls that kept people out. Now those walls were gone. His heart was open, his hands always giving, his soul at peace. Mira found him there, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "You should rest," she said softly. "It's been a long day." He looked up at her with a gentle smile. "Do you hear that?" She tilted her head, listening. "The wind." He nodded. "Yes. That sound, it's life speaking. Always moving, always reminding us that nothing stays, but everything returns in another form." She sat beside him, silent for a moment. Then she asked, "Do you ever miss the city, Uncle? The life you left behind?" He gazed at the stars for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes I miss the man I could have been if I had understood earlier. But no, I don't miss the city. I don't miss the noise, the race, the endless wanting. Here, even silence feels full." Mira smiled faintly. "Hari would be proud of you." He turned to her, eyes warm with affection. "Hari would be proud of all of us. Look around, Mira. Look at what this village has become. People helping each other, sharing food, raising children with love. That was his dream. I just helped it take shape." They sat in silence for a while, watching a few lanterns drift upward into the sky, their faint orange glow fading into the stars. Days turned into weeks again, and life returned to its peaceful rhythm. Ramesh spent his mornings tending to the garden, his afternoons teaching children how to care for the plants, and his evenings under the tree, watching the world settle into quiet harmony. But lately, he had begun to feel tired more often. His steps grew slower, his voice softer. Sometimes he would pause mid-sentence, smiling to himself as if listening to a voice only he could hear. Mira noticed it too, the stillness in his movements, the calm acceptance in his eyes. One morning, she found him sitting by the riverbank, staring at the water. "Uncle," she said gently, "you've been quiet these past days. Are you feeling well?" He looked at her and smiled faintly. "I'm fine, child. Just thinking how beautiful it all is, how everything keeps flowing, never stopping, never clinging. Life is like this river. When it's time to move, it simply moves." Her eyes softened, and she reached for his hand. "Don't talk like that. The village wouldn't be the same without you." He squeezed her hand gently. "No one stays forever, Mira. That's why we must live in a way that our love stays behind, even when we don't. That's what Hari taught me." They sat together quietly, watching the ripples spread across the river's surface. The air was filled with the sound of morning birds, their songs pure and clear. Ramesh closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the peace that had taken years to find. He knew, deep within, that everything was as it should be, that the seeds of kindness he had planted would keep growing long after he was gone. The garden, the school, the laughter of children, the lessons of simplicity, they would remain. When the breeze passed over him, it carried a familiar warmth, as if Hari himself was near. Ramesh smiled, his heart full. The river flowed on, endless and serene, carrying whispers of his life into the horizon. That evening, the sky burned with shades of gold and violet. The entire village shimmered beneath the fading sunlight, and the river glowed like a ribbon of light winding through the fields. Ramesh sat outside his small hut, a gentle smile resting on his face as the cool breeze brushed his cheeks. Children's laughter echoed from the distance, and the faint hum of a flute floated through the air. He had grown old now, his hair silvery, his hands lined with the marks of time, but there was still something young in his spirit. Each wrinkle seemed to carry a story, each smile a quiet victory over sorrow. He no longer chased happiness. He lived it, breathed it, shared it in the smallest gestures, a kind word, a loaf of bread, a hand on a child's shoulder. As night began to fall, Mira came to see him, carrying a small bowl of soup. "You haven't eaten since morning," she said softly. "You must take care of yourself." He accepted it with a grateful nod. "You always look after me, child. You remind me so much of your mother." Mira smiled shyly, sitting beside him. "Mama used to say you changed this village, uncle. That before you came, people only thought about their own fields and families. But after you and Hari taught them to share, we became one big family." Ramesh looked toward the darkening sky. "No, Mira. I didn't change them. They changed me. I just held up a mirror. Sometimes people forget how good they truly are until they see it reflected back." They sat quietly as fireflies began to appear, flickering like stars close to the ground. The river murmured nearby, its song timeless and unbroken. Mira broke the silence. "Do you ever think of Hari these days?" "Every day," Ramesh said softly. "He was more than a friend. He was my teacher. He never used big words or gave long lectures, but every act of kindness he did, it stayed with me. He showed me that peace doesn't come from owning the world, it comes from belonging to it." Mira leaned her head on his shoulder, comforted by the calm in his voice. "I wish I could have met him." Ramesh chuckled. "Oh, you have in a way. Every time you give without expecting, every time you smile at someone who's hurting, that's Hari living through you." The girl looked up at him, her eyes glowing with admiration. "Then I'll try to keep him alive, uncle. I promise." He smiled and patted her head gently. "That's all any of us can do, Mira, keep goodness alive." Later that night, when Mira had gone home, Ramesh remained by the river, gazing at the reflection of the moon. The soft ripples broke its light into shimmering fragments, and he watched them merge again, whole and complete. He thought of the life he had lived, the mistakes, the pride, the loss, and the grace that had followed. He realized that true happiness was never in having everything, but in needing only what was enough. He had once sought meaning in applause, success, and recognition, but in the quiet of this village, he found it in the sound of a child's laughter, in the sight of a neighbor sharing bread, in the peace that came from knowing he had given more than he had taken. The next morning, the sun rose in a gentle blush of pink. Birds called from the treetops, and the scent of fresh earth filled the air. But Ramesh did not rise at his usual hour. When Mira came to check on him, she found him sitting beneath the great tree, the same tree where he and Hari had once spoken for hours about life and its strange beauty. His face was calm, his eyes closed, his lips curved into a faint smile. At first, she thought he was sleeping, but as the breeze rustled the leaves, she sensed a stillness too deep for sleep. Tears welled in her eyes as she knelt beside him, her heart heavy yet peaceful, for she knew he had left exactly as he had lived in his final years, quietly, gracefully, without regret. The village mourned his passing, yet there was no despair in the air, only gratitude. They built a small stone bench under the same tree, where people could come and sit in reflection. On it they carved the words Ramesh had once said to Mira, "Happiness is not in having more, but in giving more." Seasons passed, and time flowed gently on. The garden Ramesh had tended bloomed brighter than ever. The children he taught had grown, carrying his lessons into their own lives. Mira, now older and wiser, took care of the school he had started. She often sat beneath the great tree, reading letters he had written, his words reminding her that simplicity was not the absence of richness, but the essence of it. One evening, years later, a traveler passed through the village. He was weary, his clothes dusty, his eyes clouded with disappointment. He stopped by the river to rest, and seeing Mira there, asked, "You live here? It seems so quiet. Don't you ever feel trapped in such a small place?" Mira smiled, her gaze following the slow flow of the river. "No, this place isn't small. The world feels small when you only think of yourself. But when you learn to share, every heart becomes a home, and life feels infinite. The traveler frowned slightly. Who taught you to think like that? She looked toward the old tree in the distance. A man who once had everything and found happiness only when he gave it away. The traveler followed her gaze, and something softened in his face. He walked to the tree, read the words on the stone bench, and sat down quietly. For a long time, he said nothing, listening to the rustle of leaves above and the laughter of children playing nearby. Something shifted within him, a small, unspoken understanding that perhaps peace was not something to find, but something to return to. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the traveler rose, feeling lighter. Before leaving, he turned once more toward the river and whispered, "Thank you, whoever you were." And in the hush of twilight, as fireflies began to dance once again, it felt as though the wind carried a familiar warmth, the same peaceful presence that had always lingered there, unseen but eternal, the quiet spirit of Ramesh and Hari, smiling together, their lesson living on in every heart that learned to be happy with what it had. The traveler did not know why he felt drawn to stay longer, but something about the village stirred memories long buried. As he wandered through the narrow lanes, he saw people greeting each other with warmth, children sharing fruit, and old women sitting outside their doors weaving baskets together while laughing softly. It was such a simple life, and yet every corner seemed to breathe peace. He realized he hadn't felt that kind of calm in years, not since before success, before the constant hunger for more had hollowed him out. That night, he asked for a place to sleep. Mira offered him a mat in her small home. "You can rest here, traveler," she said kindly. "This village believes no guest should go hungry or homeless." He bowed his head, grateful. "Thank you. I haven't known such kindness in a long time." Mira smiled. "Then maybe you've been walking in the wrong places." They shared a simple meal, rice, lentils, and vegetables. The traveler ate slowly, savoring the taste. "I can't remember when food last tasted like this," he said quietly. "It's not the food," Mira replied. "It's the peace that comes with it." Later, as the crickets sang in the night, the traveler sat by the door, looking out at the stars. "Who is the man whose name is written on that stone by the tree?" he asked. "Ramesh," Mira said softly. "He came here long ago, when he had lost everything that truly mattered. He found himself again by giving to others." The traveler frowned. "So he was poor." "He was rich," she answered, "but not until he learned to stop measuring wealth with gold." The traveler didn't reply. He just stared at the sky, his heart heavy with unspoken truth. He had once been much like Ramesh, a man of ambition, always reaching for more. But in the chase for success, he had lost the people he loved, the joy that once made him dream. He had traveled far, but inside he was empty. When dawn arrived, he walked to the river. Mist floated above the water, silver and soft. He saw the villagers already awake, some fetching water, some tending to fields, some praying in silence. Their faces were serene, unhurried. For the first time in years, the traveler didn't feel like an outsider. As he stood there, Mira approached with 2 cups of tea. "You're up early," she said. "I couldn't sleep," he replied. "This place, it feels alive in a way I can't explain." "That's because it is," she said with a smile. "Every person here carries a part of Ramesh's spirit. We share what we have. That's why no one feels alone." The traveler looked toward the mountains in the distance. "And yet he's gone." Mira shook her head gently. "No, not gone. You can't lose someone who has taught people how to live." They drank their tea in silence. The river glimmered under the early sun, and birds darted across the water like streaks of light. The traveler felt something within him soften, a weight lifting, a voice whispering that perhaps he didn't need to run anymore. He stayed in the village for a few more days. He helped the children with their lessons, repaired a broken fence, and joined the others in harvesting crops. Each day, he felt lighter, freer from the ghosts of his past. The villagers never asked who he was or where he came from. They simply accepted him. It was a kind of love he had never known, one without conditions or expectations. One evening, Mira found him sitting beneath the great tree again, lost in thought. "You found peace, haven't you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I think I have. I used to believe peace was something you earned after achieving everything. But now I see, it's something you create by letting go." Mira smiled. "Then you understand Ramesh's lesson." He looked at her, curious. How did he know so much about happiness? "Because he lost it once," she said. "And sometimes you must lose everything to see what truly matters." Her words sank deep into his heart. He thought of the years he had spent chasing shadows, the money, the praise, the endless climb toward a summit that never satisfied him. Now, sitting under a tree in a quiet village, he felt richer than ever before. When he finally decided to leave, the whole village gathered to bid him farewell. Children handed him garlands, and Mira placed a small clay lamp in his hands. "Wherever you go," she said, "let this remind you that light is not found, it is made." He bowed deeply, emotion thick in his throat. "I came here empty. You have given me everything I didn't know I needed." Mira smiled gently. "Then don't thank me. Thank the man whose heart changed this place." The traveler turned once more toward the river and the old tree. The morning light shimmered through the leaves, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw two figures sitting beneath it, one old, calm, and smiling, the other laughing softly beside him. When he blinked, they were gone, but their presence lingered like the warmth of sunlight. He walked away, but he carried the village in his soul. Wherever he went afterward, through cities, deserts, and distant lands, he spread what he had learned. He began to teach others to share, to slow down, to listen. He built small schools, planted trees, and helped those who had forgotten how to dream. Years passed, and people began to call him the man of peace. But whenever they praised him, he would smile and say, "Don't thank me. Thank a man named Ramesh and the people who remembered him." In time, travelers from other places began to visit that same village by the river, drawn by the stories they had heard. They came seeking what Ramesh had found, the secret to happiness. And every time Mira, now older, would greet them with the same gentle smile and lead them to the great tree. "Sit," she would say. "Listen to the wind, to the river, to your own heart. Happiness is not something you chase, it's something you remember." And as the visitors sat there, the leaves whispering above them, many of them would close their eyes and feel it, that quiet warmth, that soft, timeless peace that had begun long ago with two men who had learned that life's truest joy lies not in what we keep, but in what we give away. As the years rolled on, the village became a symbol of peace to the world beyond its hills. Travelers continued to arrive, each carrying a different burden, loneliness, regret, greed, sorrow, but somehow they all left lighter. The whispers of Ramesh's story spread quietly across lands, passed from one soul to another like a secret meant to heal. One day, a young journalist named Arjun came to the village. He had grown tired of the world's noise, the endless rush of deadlines, opinions, and ambition. His life in the city had been filled with applause and approval, yet every night he lay awake, feeling a strange emptiness creeping through him. When he heard rumors of a place where people lived without envy or fear, he decided to see it for himself. As he entered the village, he was struck by the silence, not the heavy kind, but the soft, living kind that breathed peace. He saw farmers working together, children playing with wooden toys, and women laughing as they drew water from the well. No one seemed to be in a hurry. No one looked lost. It was as though time itself had slowed to let them live more fully. Arjun began asking questions. "Who leads this village?" he asked an old man sitting beneath the shade of a mango tree. The old man smiled. "No one leads us, son. We lead each other." Confused, Arjun frowned. "But how can that work? Surely someone must make the decisions." The man chuckled. "We make them together. When you share everything, there is nothing to fight for." Arjun scribbled in his notebook, fascinated yet skeptical. He spent the next few days observing the people. He saw them share meals without counting portions, trade goods without haggling, and help one another without being asked. It defied everything he had known about human nature. On the fourth day, he noticed an elderly woman tending to a small garden near the river. She moved slowly, but her hands were steady, her touch gentle on the flowers. He approached her and said, "I'm writing about your village. I've been told this place was built on one man's teachings, a man named Ramesh." The woman looked up, her eyes kind and deep. "Yes," she said softly. "He was the heart that showed us how to beat together." "Were you here when he lived?" Arjun asked. "I was a child," she replied, "but his spirit never left. It's in the soil, the trees, the river. Even the wind remembers him." Her words struck something in Arjun, a quiet wonder he hadn't felt in years. "Can you tell me about him?" She smiled faintly. "Stories about Ramesh aren't told. They are lived. Stay long enough and you'll understand." That night, Arjun couldn't sleep. He walked to the river where moonlight shimmered on the water. The old tree stood silently, its roots deep, its branches reaching out like arms ready to embrace. He sat beneath it, staring at the stone bench where the words were carved. Happiness is not in having more, but in giving more. He ran his fingers over the words, and for the first time in years, he felt small in a beautiful way, as though the universe had gently reminded him of his place within it. He thought of his life, the deadlines, the arguments, the endless wanting. It all seemed distant now, almost meaningless. He stayed for weeks, helping the villagers with their work, listening to their stories. No one boasted about their lives. No one complained about their struggles. When the crops failed one season, they simply shared what was left. When a child fell sick, the entire village came together to care for him. It was not perfection, it was harmony, born not from wealth, but from love. One morning, as Arjun helped repair the roof of the school, Mira's granddaughter approached him with a bowl of fruit. She was a young woman now, full of life and grace. "You've been here long," she said, handing him the bowl. "Have you found what you were looking for?" Arjun looked at her, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I wasn't looking for anything. Maybe I was just running." She smiled gently. "Then maybe you should stop running. Sit by the river tonight. Listen. You might hear what the heart doesn't say in words." That evening, he did exactly that. The air was still, filled only with the sounds of water and crickets. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Memories flooded him, his childhood, his father's laughter, his mother's warmth, the first story he ever wrote, the first time someone praised him, the first time he began to care too much about being seen. Tears filled his eyes. He whispered to the wind, "What have I been chasing?" And somehow, in that silence, the answer came, not in a voice, but in a feeling. Enough. You already have enough. The realization broke something open inside him. He laughed through his tears, overwhelmed by the simplicity of it all. The stars shimmered brighter. The river seemed to hum softly, and he felt an immense peace washing over him. When morning came, Arjun knew what he had to do. He left the village, not because he wanted to escape it, but because he wanted to share it. He wrote about what he had seen, but not as a journalist, as a man reborn. His words carried no embellishment, no clever tricks, only truth, that happiness is not a destination, but a way of living. His article spread far and wide. People who read it began to question their own lives, their endless race for more, their forgotten joys, their buried gratitude. Some left their cities to find peace in nature. Others stayed where they were but began to live differently, sharing more, demanding less, loving deeper. The village became known not as a place on a map, but as a symbol, a reminder of what the human heart was meant to be. Arjun often returned, always welcomed like family. He would sit beneath the great tree, feeling the same stillness that had once changed him. And each time he left, he carried a little more of that peace with him, like a seed waiting to be planted wherever the world needed it most. He never met Ramesh, never saw his face, but he felt his presence in every act of kindness, in every shared smile, in every silent moment when gratitude filled the air. It was as if Ramesh's soul had dissolved into life itself, unseen, but always felt, whispering to anyone willing to listen that true happiness begins not when you take your first step toward success, but when you stop running away from what you already have. Years passed, and Arjun's story continued to ripple through the world like waves born from a single stone. People began to write to him, strangers from cities and villages alike, telling him how his words had changed them. Some left their high-paying jobs to start community farms, others opened schools or shelters. Some simply began to live more consciously, cherishing the small things they had long ignored. But fame, this time, felt different for Arjun. He no longer chased it. Every time a letter arrived, he read it with gratitude, then quietly folded it away in a wooden box he kept on his desk. He no longer sought applause, for he knew that the true power of words lay not in how loudly they were heard, but in how deeply they were felt. One afternoon, while walking through a busy city street, he noticed something that made him stop. Amid the noise of honking cars and flashing advertisements, a small group of children sat by the sidewalk, handing out cups of water to passers-by. They had written a sign on cardboard that read, "Be happy with what you have, share if you can." Arjun's heart swelled. He knelt beside them and asked, "Where did you learn that?" One little boy grinned, his eyes bright. "My teacher told us about a village where people share everything. She said there was a man named Ramesh who showed them how to live." The name hit him like a gentle wind from the past. He smiled, placed his hand on the boy's head, and whispered, "Then you're already part of his village, little one. Never forget that." That night, as he sat by his window watching the city lights blink like distant stars, he realized something profound. Ramesh's spirit had spread far beyond the river, beyond the hills, beyond the village that had once held him. His lesson had become a living pulse in the world, carried by every person who chose kindness over greed, simplicity over excess, peace over pride. Months later, Arjun received a letter sealed with rough, handmade paper. It was from Mira's granddaughter. Her handwriting was delicate yet strong. "Dear Arjun, the river still sings every morning. The garden you helped tend has grown wild and beautiful. People come from far away to sit under the great tree. We tell them your story too, how a man came to find peace and left a piece of it in all of us. The village remembers you, just as it remembers Ramesh and Hari. Come home again when your heart calls you." He read the letter twice, then set it against his chest. For years, he had thought of the village as a place he had visited. But now he understood it wasn't a place he had left, it was a home that lived quietly inside him. He packed a small bag and took the next train east. The journey felt different this time. The landscapes outside the window, fields, rivers, forests, seemed to breathe with life. Each passing scene whispered stories of simplicity, of people who still found joy in less. When he finally stepped off the train and began walking the familiar dirt path, the smell of wet earth and wild jasmine filled the air. It was as if time had folded back on itself. The village looked the same, though the trees were taller and the laughter of a new generation echoed in the air. Children ran barefoot across the fields and women waved from doorways. Arjun felt his chest tighten with warmth. At the riverbank, he saw Mira's granddaughter waiting beneath the great tree, her face lit with a gentle smile. "You came," she said simply. "I had to," he replied. "The city began to feel too loud again." She laughed softly. "Then sit. The river has missed your silence." They sat side by side watching the water flow. Arjun felt the same peace that had once awakened him years ago. "It's strange," he said. "I spent so many years trying to tell others how to live simply, but I forgot how easily the noise creeps back." She nodded. "That's why Ramesh always said happiness isn't a treasure you find. It's a fire you tend. Leave it unattended and it fades." Her words struck deep. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was setting behind the hills, bathing everything in gold. The village bells rang faintly, calling people for evening prayers. The sound blended with the rustling leaves, forming a melody that seemed to reach into the soul. Arjun closed his eyes and whispered, "It's so beautiful here, so alive." She smiled, because people here don't take life for granted. Every breath, every seed, every smile, they treat it like a gift. That's what Ramesh taught us. They stayed until the stars appeared, countless and still. Arjun lay back on the grass, the scent of earth grounding him, the sound of crickets surrounding him. "Do you ever wonder," he said softly, "what happens to souls like his? To men like Ramesh and Hari?" She thought for a moment, her gaze fixed on the stars. "They don't go anywhere," she said. "They become the voice in our hearts that tells us to be kind when no one is watching. The calm we feel when we stop wanting more. The peace that visits us when we choose to give." Arjun turned to her, his eyes glistening. "Then he's everywhere." "Yes," she whispered. "Everywhere goodness still exists." The next morning, Arjun walked through the village again, greeting everyone he passed. He helped an old man carry water, played with a group of laughing children, and listened to women singing as they ground grain. Every sound, every smile, every act of care felt sacred. Later that day, he visited the small school. The children had drawn pictures on the wall, rivers, trees, people holding hands, and in the center, a simple quote written in uneven letters, "Be happy with what you have." He stood there for a long time, reading it over and over. As he left the classroom, a young boy tugged at his sleeve. "Sir," the boy said shyly, "is it true that Ramesh once lived here?" "Yes," Arjun said, smiling. "And he still does." "How?" Arjun pointed to the boy's chest. "Because you remember him." The boy grinned, nodding proudly, and ran off to join his friends. As the evening drew near, Arjun returned to the tree once more. The wind rustled gently through the leaves, and for a moment he could almost hear soft laughter, two voices intertwined, familiar and kind. He didn't try to explain it. He didn't need to. Some truths were meant to be felt, not understood. He sat there until the stars rose again, his heart steady and light, knowing that life had come full circle, that the gift Ramesh had given the world still flowed through it quietly, endlessly, like the river beside him, whispering the same message it always had. You already have everything you need to be happy. The following morning, as the first rays of sunlight kissed the river's surface, Arjun stood beneath the old banyan tree where everything had once begun, where he had first met Ramesh, where silence had taught him what words could not. The mist swirled gently around his feet, and for a fleeting moment, he could almost feel Ramesh's presence beside him, calm, smiling, eternal. He closed his eyes, and a memory surfaced, the sound of Ramesh's laughter, the way his hands worked the soil with reverence, the peace that radiated from his every breath. That peace now flowed within him, unshakable. He realized that Ramesh had never been just a man. He was a mirror, reflecting the truth hidden in every human heart, the truth that joy is not found in what we possess, but in what we give, not in what we chase, but in what we cherish. The villagers gathered slowly, drawn by something unseen, perhaps by the same quiet magic that had once drawn Arjun here. Mira's granddaughter stood among them, her face glowing with serenity. He used to say, she began softly, that the greatest legacy a man can leave is not wealth or fame, but peace in the hearts he touches. Arjun turned to her, his eyes shimmering. He was right, and peace, once shared, never fades. He looked at the villagers, the children with their bright eyes, the elders whose faces told stories of seasons and survival, the families who had learned to live with gratitude rather than greed. He saw in them the same flame Ramesh had once lit, burning quietly, keeping the darkness of the world at bay. The air carried the scent of blooming jasmine, mingling with the faint hum of distant prayer bells. Arjun raised his hands gently and spoke, not as a teacher, not as a man of fame, but as a voice for something far greater than himself. Once, I believed that happiness was something I had to earn, through success, through praise, through struggle. But I was wrong. Happiness is not a destination. It is a seed we already carry within us. The more we nurture it with kindness, patience, and love, the more it grows. And when we share that joy with others, it multiplies, endlessly, beautifully, beyond measure. The crowd listened in silence. Even the river seemed to pause, its ripples glistening like liquid gold under the morning sun. Arjun continued, his voice steady yet full of emotion. We live in a world that teaches us to run, to always want more, to measure life in achievements. But Ramesh taught me something far more valuable, that peace is found not in reaching the mountain's peak, but in feeling the earth beneath our feet as we climb. Every moment is enough if lived with gratitude. Every breath is a miracle if felt with awareness. He took a deep breath, letting the stillness sink in. Birds fluttered across the sky, their wings cutting through beams of sunlight. Ramesh once told me that the world does not need more successful people. It needs more healers, more peacemakers, more people who live with hearts unafraid to care. That is how we truly change the world, not through noise, but through quiet acts of compassion. The villagers nodded, their faces reflecting both tears and smiles. Some clasped their hands together, others simply stood, letting the words settle deep within. Mira's granddaughter stepped forward and placed a small clay lamp before Arjun. For him, she whispered, and for all those who teach us to live. Arjun knelt, lit the lamp, and watched its flame flicker to life. It danced softly in the breeze, fragile yet fearless. And in that single flame, he saw everything: Ramesh's wisdom, Hari's laughter, Mira's kindness, the lessons of the river, the innocence of the children, and the quiet strength of every soul who had ever chosen love over fear. He whispered, "This is what remains. This is what endures." As the villagers began to sing, a soft, wordless melody that carried across the fields, Arjun felt something inside him unfold. It was not pride. It was not sorrow. It was the rare, luminous peace of a man who had finally found home, not in a place, but in purpose. Years later, the story of that day became legend. Travelers would come from far and wide to see the banyan tree where Ramesh once taught and where Arjun once spoke. They said the air there felt different, lighter, purer, as if infused with unseen blessings. Some claimed that when the wind passed through the leaves at dusk, you could hear whispers of laughter, of wisdom, of words that transcended time itself. Under that same tree, children would gather every evening, listening to the elders retell the story, how a simple man changed lives not with wealth, but with stillness, how another man carried that message into the noisy world and planted it in countless hearts, and how that message continues to grow, unseen but eternal, like roots beneath the soil. And as generations passed, the river kept flowing, steady, endless, unbroken. The village thrived not in riches, but in peace. The children who once played by its banks grew into kind, humble leaders, carrying forward the legacy of compassion. And somewhere in the silence between the river's murmurs and the rustle of the trees, the world still felt the presence of Ramesh and Arjun, not as two men who once lived, but as one spirit that forever reminded humanity of what truly matters. For as long as there is kindness, they live. For as long as there is gratitude, they remain. For as long as someone pauses to listen to the river, to smile at a stranger, or to find beauty in the smallest of things, their story continues, flowing endlessly like the water that never stops, whispering the same timeless truth. Happiness is not found in the noise of the world, but in the quiet rhythm of a heart that has learned to love.